You think about this person every single day. Sometimes in the morning, sometimes before you go to sleep, sometimes even in the middle of a conversation with someone else. And the most disturbing part? You've never had anything real with them. Maybe a lingering look, a conversation that seemed to mean more than it should have, a moment that just hung in the air. But there's never been a relationship, no declaration of love or no actual kiss. And yet this person occupies more space in your mind than people who have been a part of your life. Carl Jung figured out why this happens over a century ago. And Andrew Huberman validated the neuroscience behind it in his Stanford lab. What you're about to hear will completely change how you understand this phenomenon, because it's not weakness, it's not obsession, it's definitely not madness. It's something much deeper happening in your psyche and in your brain. There's a term that Jungian psychotherapist James Hollis coined to describe this. He called it the magical other. The idea that there's someone out there who's right for us, a soulmate who will fix all the damage from our personal history. And here's the part no one tells you. That person you can't seem to forget probably has never been themselves in your mind. They've been a receptacle for something Jung called the anima, or animus projection. Let me explain what that means before we go any further. Within every man, there's an unconscious feminine image that Jung called the anima. Within every woman, there's an unconscious masculine image that he called the animus. These images are composed of childhood experiences, collective archetypes, emotional memories, and everything you've never consciously developed in yourself. Jung went even further. He mapped out 4 stages of the anima. The first stage he called Eve, the image of woman as a biological instinctive object related to pure sexuality. The second stage he called Helen, the romantic aesthetic woman, the image of beauty and desire that inspires overwhelming passion. The third stage he called Mary, the spiritualized woman, the divine mother, the figure of purity and devotion. And the fourth stage, the highest stage, he called Sophia, feminine wisdom, the inner guide, the bridge to the self. And here's something that very few people understand. When you become obsessed with someone you've never been with, you're usually stuck in one of the early stages, Eve or Helen. The image you project is loaded with desire, with romantic fantasy, with an intensity that feels overwhelming. But it's not integration, it's projection. And projection keeps you trapped. The masculine animus follows a similar pattern. The early stages are more primitive, more linked to power, to protection, to strength. The higher stages move toward wisdom, depth, spiritual integration. And here's the problem. When you meet someone who seems to embody this internal image, something magical happens. You don't see the real person. You see the projection. You see the magical other. And your brain responds as if it's found something essential for its psychological survival. A study published in Nature Communications Psychology in 2024 showed that attachment patterns are transmitted through mother-child interactions mediated by oxytocin. This means that the way you attached in childhood literally shaped the neural circuits that determine to whom you will attach in adulthood. And even more importantly, it shaped to whom you will project your magical other. Huberman explained in episode number 59 of the Huberman Lab something that validates this neurologically. He said that the neural circuits for attachment between child and caregiver are reused for romantic attachment later in life. They're not separate circuits. They're the same circuits. And this explains why you can feel that this person you've never been with is absolutely essential. Because to your brain, they activated the same circuits that your first caregiver activated. But hold on, because what's coming next is even more revealing. Huberman also talked about something he called positive delusion, the belief that only this person can make me feel this way. And he said that this positive delusion is predictive of long-term attachment. In other words, the more you believe that only this person can complete you, the more your brain attaches to them. And here's the brutal irony. You can have this positive delusion about someone you've never really known, someone with whom you've never had a real relationship, because the delusion isn't about the person, It's about the image you've projected onto them. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine a woman who had an emotionally absent father, physically present but never really available, never listened, never validated, never offered the emotional security that every child needs. This woman grows up, and her animus, her internal masculine image, remains underdeveloped in the area of emotional security. Now, she meets a man, maybe in college, maybe at work, maybe at a party. He's not especially handsome. He's not particularly successful. But there's something about him. A calm presence, an apparent security, a way of looking at her that seems to say, "I see you." And that's it. The projection happens. She doesn't see this man. She sees the part of her father that she never had. She sees the security she's always sought. She sees the validation she's always needed. And if this man never gets really close, if there's never a real relationship, the projection remains intact, perfect, unaltered by reality. And this woman can spend years, decades even, thinking about this man who was never hers, because he isn't a man in her mind. He's the incarnation of an unmet psychological need. This happens with men too, with the same intensity, sometimes even more. Jung wrote this directly. He said that a man will fall in love with a woman who embodies his anima image. A woman will choose a partner who carries her animus projection, and the problem is that this happens automatically, unconsciously. You don't choose to project, you simply project. And when you project onto someone who's never been yours, something even more complex happens. Your brain doesn't have the reality of a relationship to disconfirm the fantasy. There are no fights. There are no disappointments. There are no moments when the person showed their flawed human side. The image remains perfect. Eyes on a perfect image is much more addicting to the brain than a real person. Researchers in 2024 discovered something disturbing about rumination. People who tend to ruminate, that is, to keep thinking repeatedly about the same things, have structural differences in a brain region called the precuneus. This region is closely linked to other brain areas involved in memory, self-focus, and attention. Translating this to our topic, when you find yourself constantly thinking about someone who was never truly yours, you're not just simply remembering them. You're actively engaging circuits of self-reference, circuits of memory, and circuits of personal significance. And each time you activate these neural pathways, they become stronger. Neuroplasticity, in this case, is working against you. You are literally training your brain to fixate on this person. And there's another element, one that Carl Jung discovered, and Andrew Huberman at Stanford has validated through a neuroscientific lens. Jung spoke extensively about what happens when we project our anima or animus onto someone. He posited that as long as the projection persists, we don't see the real person. We see our fantasy. We see what we need to see. And this fantasy serves a profound psychological function. It represents parts of ourselves that remain undeveloped. Let me illustrate with an example to make this crystal clear. Let's say you're a highly rational person, very controlled, intensely logical. Your anima or animus might represent the exact opposite: spontaneity, free-flowing emotion, creative expression. And when you encounter someone who appears to embody these very qualities, you project onto that person all those aspects of yourself that have remained underdeveloped or suppressed. And here's the crucial part. You don't fall in love with the person themselves. You fall in love with the lost parts of yourself that you perceive in them. This explains why you can become completely obsessed with someone you barely know. Why you can spend years thinking about someone with whom you've never had a proper relationship. Why the intensity of your feelings seems disproportionate to what actually transpired between you. Because it's not about them. It was never really about them. It's fundamentally about you. About the aspects of yourself that you've projected onto them and that now seem, tantalizingly, out of reach. And there's something I need to tell you before we go further. There's a neurological phenomenon called the default mode network, often abbreviated as DMN. It's a network of interconnected brain regions that become active when your mind is wandering, when you're not focused on an external task, when you're essentially operating on autopilot. And guess what the default mode network does? It generates self-referential thoughts about you, about your identity, about your past, about your relationships. It's the system that creates the narrative of your life while you're not consciously paying attention. And here's where the problem arises. When you project your anima or animus onto someone, that person becomes integrated into your very identity narrative. They become a part of the story you tell yourself about yourself. And the default mode network keeps activating this narrative repeatedly. Researchers have discovered that in individuals with chronic rumination, the default mode network exhibits increased connectivity with the subgenual prefrontal cortex, a brain region associated with self-criticism and negative thinking. This implies that when you're obsessing over someone who was never yours, your brain isn't simply recalling memories. It's connecting that person to your core identity, to your personal narrative, to your very sense of who you are. And the more you do this, the stronger that neural connection becomes. A 2024 study published in Cognitive Affective and Behavioral Neuroscience demonstrated that worry and rumination are encoded in a similar manner within the brain. They identified clusters within brain networks implicated in self-referential thought and memory retrieval. This signifies that when you're stuck thinking about that person, your brain is performing a very specific action. It's linking that person to significant memories and to your own self-concept. And here's how Andrew Huberman from Huberman Lab at Stanford would likely explain it. The dorsomedial prefrontal cortex, or DMPFC, is a brain region intrinsically involved in thoughts about oneself and about others. Researchers have found that dynamic connectivity with this region is a reliable marker of rumination. The more active this connection, the more you tend to get trapped in repetitive, intrusive thoughts. And you know what else activates this region? Thoughts about relationships, about significant people, about love. So when you're constantly thinking about that person who was never yours, you are literally strengthening the neural connections that maintain that thought process active. You're creating a neural loop. And neural loops are extremely difficult to break once they've become firmly established. But here's the part that almost no one tells you. And this is precisely where Carl Jung becomes essential. Jung argued that when we withdraw our projections and encounter the other as they truly are, then love can begin. Not a love based on illusion, but a love rooted in presence. This isn't romantic in the cinematic sense. It's something much deeper. It's a love that says, I see you, not as my fantasy, not as my salvation, but as a soul, navigating your own path. And that is the key to setting yourself free. What you're feeling for this person who was never yours isn't love for the person themselves. It's love for the projected aspects of yourself. And healing doesn't come from getting that person. Healing comes from withdrawing the projection and integrating those disowned parts back into yourself. This is what Jung called the integration of the anima or animus. He considered this integration to be the masterpiece of individuation. It comes after working with the shadow. It's more profound, more subtle, and more elusive. And when you stop seeking your soulmate in others and begin to cultivate a relationship with your inner opposite, something paradoxical happens. You become capable of more authentic and satisfying relationships with real people. Let me translate this into the language of neuroscience. When you project onto someone, your brain creates a reward circuit associated with that person. Each time you think about them, there's a small release of dopamine, not because they've given you something tangible, but because the fantasy itself activates the reward system. And perfect, idealized fantasies activate the reward system more consistently than imperfect realities ever could. Dr. Anna Lemke, a guest on the Huberman Lab podcast, has explained that dopamine is about wanting, not about having. You can become trapped in a cycle of wanting someone you'll never truly have, precisely because the wanting keeps the dopamine flowing. And here's the cruel truth. Actually getting the person would shatter the illusion, because then you'd be confronted with reality. And reality never quite lives up to the projection. Jung witnessed this play out countless times with his patients. People who finally attained the object of their obsession only to discover that the real person was completely different from the projected image. The passion fades, the enchantment vanishes, and they're left wondering what happened to that overwhelming feeling. What happened was that the projection was forced to confront reality, and projections simply cannot survive prolonged contact with what is real. So, what do you do with this information? First, you need to understand that what you're feeling is real. The pain is real. The longing is real. The emptiness is real. But the cause isn't the person. The root cause is a part of you, a part of yourself that was projected onto them and now feels just out of reach. Second, you need to begin the work of integration. Ask yourself, what does this person represent to you? What qualities do you see in them that you haven't yet developed in yourself? What parts of your psyche do they seem to carry? Third, understand that this process takes time. Carl Jung said that the integration of the anima or animus is the masterpiece of individuation. It's not something that happens overnight. It's the work of a lifetime. Fourth, use neuroscience to your advantage. Researchers have discovered that cognitive behavioral therapy, especially when focused on rumination, can literally change brain connectivity. Specifically, it reduces the connection between the left posterior cingulate cortex and other regions involved in self-referential thought. Fifth, there's a practical protocol, combining Carl Jung and Andrew Huberman. Let me explain it step by step. Every morning, before you check your phone, before you do anything else, sit in silence for 5 minutes. Don't meditate in the traditional sense. Just observe your thoughts. And when that person pops into your mind, and they will, ask yourself a specific question. What does this person represent to me? Not who they are, what they represent. Write down the answer. Every day. It could be a single word. It could be a phrase. It could be a paragraph. But write it down. Because the act of writing activates the prefrontal cortex in a way that passive thinking just doesn't. You're literally recruiting different brain systems. After 2 weeks of doing this, you'll start to see patterns. You'll realize it's not the person you're after. It's specific qualities. They are parts of yourself that you've projected onto them. And then comes the crucial part. Start developing those qualities in yourself. If you projected spontaneity, start practicing spontaneity. If you projected emotional security, work on your own emotional regulation. If you projected creativity, start creating something. Andrew Huberman would talk about neuroplasticity here. When you practice new skills, you literally rewire your brain. You create new neural connections, and the old connections, the ones that kept you fixated on that person, start to weaken from lack of use. Carl Jung would call this withdrawal of projection. You're taking back the parts of yourself that you placed onto that person and reintegrating them into yourself. And here's the most interesting thing. When you do this work, the obsession diminishes naturally. Not because you forced it, not because you repressed it, but because you no longer need to seek outside what you now have within. Sixth, understand the role of sleep in this process. Andrew Huberman has explained in several Huberman Lab episodes that REM sleep is when your brain processes the emotions of the day. During REM sleep, activity in the amygdala, the emotional center of the brain, decreases significantly. This allows emotional memories to be reprocessed in a less intense way. But here's the problem. If you're lying awake thinking about that person before you go to sleep, you're literally fueling the rumination. At the very moment when you should be preparing for emotional processing, you're giving your brain more material to process in a distorted way. The protocol is simple. 1 hour before bed. No social media. No digital stalking. No looking at old photos. Nothing that activates the image of that person in your mind. Instead, activities that recruit other brain networks. Reading. Calming music. Light conversation with people who are present. This isn't about running away. It's about giving your brain the space it needs to process, without reinforcing the negative neural loops. And here's something that Carl Jung would have loved to know if he had access to modern neuroscience. During REM sleep, the default mode network remains partially active. This means that dreams frequently involve identity and relational processing. And guess who shows up in your dreams when you're projecting strongly? The person. Always the person. Carl Jung analyzed over 80,000 dreams throughout his career, and he discovered that dreams have a compensatory function. They try to balance the psyche by showing you what your conscious mind is ignoring or suppressing. If you dream repeatedly about this person who was never yours, your unconscious is trying to show you something. It's trying to make you see that the obsession isn't about them. It's about a part of yourself that needs attention. Pay attention to your dreams. Write them down, not to interpret them literally, but to observe patterns, to see what your unconscious is trying to compensate for. 7th, accept that this process isn't linear. You'll have days when it feels like you're over it, days when you barely think about them, and then, out of nowhere, something triggers the memory. A song, a smell, a phrase, and you find yourself right back at the beginning. This isn't failure. This is how integration works. Carl Jung said that individuation isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. You revisit the same themes, but each time from a different perspective. Each time with more awareness. Each time with more capacity to see what was previously invisible. Neuroscience confirms this. Consolidated neural patterns don't disappear instantly. They weaken gradually with disuse and are overwritten by new patterns. But that takes time. And during that time, the old patterns can be reactivated by external triggers. The key is, don't blame yourself when this happens. Observe. Note the trigger. Note the sensation. And then get back to the work of integration. Each time you do this, the old patterns weaken a little more, and the new patterns, the ones you're creating consciously, become stronger. 8th, consider seeking professional help. If this obsession is significantly interfering with your life, if it's affecting your work, your real relationships, your ability to function, consider working with a Jungian therapist or a professional who understands both the psychological and the neurobiological dimensions. There are specific techniques for working with projections, techniques like active imagination, which Carl Jung developed, combined with modern neuroscience-based approaches, can significantly accelerate the process. You don't have to do this alone. In fact, it's often more effective to do it with guidance from someone who understands the terrain. In practical terms, this means you can train your brain to break free from the loop, but it requires practice. It requires consistency. And it requires understanding what's really happening when you keep thinking about that person. You're not remembering someone. You're encountering lost parts of yourself, parts that you projected onto a face, onto a name, onto a presence that now feels essential, and the only way to recover those parts is to remove them from the projection and integrate them into yourself. This is what Carl Jung called the withdrawal of projection. And he said that when we do this, when we finally see the other as they really are, and not as our fantasy, then something extraordinary happens. We become whole. We no longer need someone to complete us, because we complete ourselves internally. We no longer need to project, because we integrate. We no longer need a magical other, because we become our own magic. And ironically, it's exactly at that point that we become capable of true love, not the love of projection, not the love of fantasy, not the love of need, but the love of presence, the love that sees the other as they are, the love that doesn't need illusions to exist. Let me tell you something that happens frequently, and that illustrates this perfectly. Many people who do the work of integration report something curious. After months or years working on themselves, they finally re-encounter that person, whether by chance, whether at a college reunion, whether through a social media algorithm. And when this happens, when they finally see the real person after having done the internal work, something magical and unsettling happens at the same time. The person seems different, not physically, but the aura, the presence, the feeling they caused. All of that has disappeared. The person now seems normal, human, with qualities and flaws, like anyone else. And the most common reaction is, how could I have been obsessed with this for years? It's not that the person changed, it's that you changed. You withdrew the projection, you integrated the parts of yourself that you had placed in them. And now you see what was always there, an ordinary person, with their own journey, with their own problems, without any capacity to complete you, because that capacity never existed outside of you. This is proof that the work worked, and the most beautiful thing of all. When you get to this point, you don't feel anger, you don't feel resentment, you don't feel shame for the lost years. You feel gratitude because that person, without knowing it, without doing anything consciously, was the catalyst for one of the most important works of your life. They showed you what needed to be integrated. They were the mirror where you finally saw your own lost parts. And for that, in a strange and profound way, you may even be grateful to them. Before I continue, I want to acknowledge something important. This type of content, connecting Carl Jung with modern neuroscience, requires in-depth research, academic studies, specific episodes of the Huberman lab, careful integration of concepts that academia typically keeps separate. If this video has given you clarity about something you've carried for years, if it explained a pattern you didn't understand, if it brought a little peace to a mind that doesn't stop ruminating, consider supporting this work. The Super Thanks button is there for anyone who wants to be part of this community in a more active way. It's not an obligation, but it's what allows this type of content to continue existing, without compromises to sponsors who dictate what can or cannot be said. Your support has a real impact. Now, I want you to do something. Think of the person you can't forget, the one who was never yours, but who seems to occupy a permanent space in your mind. And ask yourself, what do they represent to you? Not who they are, but what they represent. Spontaneity, freedom, creativity, strength, vulnerability, passion, whatever it is, that's yours. That's always been yours. You just haven't developed that part yet. And while it remains projected onto another person, you're going to continue trapped in this loop. Liberation begins when you understand that the journey isn't about getting that person. The journey is about reintegrating the parts of yourself that you projected onto them. Carl Jung knew this. Andrew Huberman validated the neuroscience behind it. And now, you know it too, in the comments. Tell me, who is this person to you? What do they represent? What quality of theirs do you secretly wish you had in yourself? Be honest. Because honesty is the first step towards integration. We'll see each other in the next video. And remember, you're not thinking about someone else. You're thinking about lost parts of yourself, dressed in the face of another person. The time to recover those parts is now.